Hi, everybody. It's Rick Manning, President Americans for Limited Government. The issue of trade is going to be heating up in the Republican circles anyway, as President Donald Trump has launched a salvo defending his trade policies, which put America first. I wanted you to see something he said just a couple of days ago when he was announcing his economic part of his economic policy. I think you'll find it interesting.
When I was president, the so-called experts hysterically predicted that my tariffs on China, Mexico, and other countries would crash the economy. Instead, the opposite happened, exactly the opposite. Under my policies, we had virtually no inflation. We had tremendous job creation. We had rapid wage growth for the first time in many, many years. And we had more than 17,000 new factories open up for business right here in the USA. Through my strategic national manufacturing initiative, we will do it again. We'll be bigger and better and stronger than we've ever been. And we did a great job 2 years ago. We'll do even better this time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, as you can see, there's a real push in the Trump world to promote the Trump trade policy. Ironically, we're seeing a real divergence in ideas on the Republican side as those who have cling to the old idea of unfettered free trade, where America doesn't protect its economic borders any more than Biden protects our physical borders. That idea that somehow America benefits when we ship our jobs overseas, when we hollow out our country and we make it so Americans are put last while people around the world are put first, all under the promise that we're going to get cheap TVs and cheap goods in return. The hollowing out America is something that Donald Trump focused on. It's something that Donald Trump fought against, and it's something that he brought a new constituency of people to support Republican politics and Republican politicians, because it's people who've been forgotten, people who've been left behind, people who were ignored, and basically people who the establishment in both parties looked down upon and looked at them as being riffraff who didn't deserve to be heard. These were Americans and are Americans, blue collar Americans. These are Americans who didn't necessarily go to college. These are Americans who work with their hands for a living, get dirt under their fingernails, and pay their bills, go to church, own a gun, and basically, put an American flag in their front yard. These are Americans who, in the past, both parties had given lip service to. The Democrats depended on the labor unions to deliver these voters. The Republicans depended upon patriotism and the Second Amendment to try to drive these voters into the Republican column. When Donald Trump took on the trade issue and said, we're no longer going to let our country be neutralized, our country be hollowed out by the Chinese and others, when he said that, he was appealing directly to those voters. He was appealing directly to those voters. And he was doing it not because of a political desire. He was doing it because it was the right thing. It was about making America great. It wasn't about making the world great. It's about making America great. Because when America's great, the rest of the world gets a whole lot better. And when America's down on our knees, the rest of the world looks like a pretty dismal place. And so that's what Donald Trump did. I wanted to bring up and just show you something that's there was a big conference in Florida this weekend that competed with the CPAC conference in DC. That was basically a group of big contributors who were listening to various presidential candidates talk about what they believed, and from a group called Club for Growth. And Club for Growth, Americans for Limited Government and Club for Growth agree on a lot of things. We agree in limited government. We agree in lower taxes. We agree about cutting the size and scope of government. You can basically take a litany of different things and say, that we're in agreement. But there's something that they believe that I think is antithetical to really making America great again. And that is, they believe in absolute, complete, unfettered free trade. And I'm just going to show you this thing real quick. I'll read it to you because it's a little hard to read. Here's from the Club for Growth website. Free trade is about economic freedom and limited government. People should have the right to buy and sell from whomever they please without the interference of government. Now, Within the context of the United States, that's true. When government hinders the otherwise free flow of goods and services, it ends up picking winners and losers in the marketplace. Winners and losers in the marketplace. For instance, if China is allegedly dumping cheap steel into the country and the US government responds by enacting some form of a trade barrier, often a tariff, then negative consequences occur. Now, here's where they make a jump. They get you to say, yeah, I agree with free trade, with trade within the borders, but then they go off and they say, let's equate, being able to have trade with whoever you want to within the borders. Let's now look at this as an extra border deal, as if the US borders don't exist, as if China doesn't have a different interest in the United States, as if China doesn't have an interest in destroying the US steel and aluminum industry and other industries in America. So we become dependent upon Chinese steel. That's a level of naivety that is almost unsurpassed. And yet the Club for Growth trade policy does just that. Yes, the domestic steel industry might experience relief, but the American businesses that use imported steels to make a final product, i.e. auto companies and construction, will suffer, as will the final purchasers of those products. Well, they're going to really suffer if the American steel industry doesn't exist, because we've allowed the Chinese to break the rules, the rules of the road, the rules that actually govern trade in the world, by selling steel to Mexico to then re-import from Mexico to the United States, by selling aluminum to Canada and then re-import it from Canada into the United States, taking advantage of the what then was the NAFTA. And so if you assume that China is actually following the rules, you've got to sit there and say, oh, well, that's not that's actually going to help everybody if we just have this unfettered steel flowing into our country and destroy our aluminum and steel manufacturers. The only problem is when we go to war with China, we're not going to have aluminum and steel manufacturers to actually make our ships, to provide the steel we need for our planes, to provide the steel we need for our tanks. And we're not going to have it because we foolishly let our steel and aluminum manufacturers go away under this false flag of free trade, which, by the way, isn't actually free trade. I'm going to get away from this because I'm about to rant. It actually isn't free trade. Let's think about this. What this so-called free trade is, following rules that are set up in advance, an agreement by two governments or multiple governments that govern what the tariffs will be, what all the different arrangements will be related to trade. When somebody supports a free trade agreement, they're not saying we're going to just eliminate all of our economic borders. It's an agreement between two sides that's reciprocal, where people go back and forth and negotiate, and maybe a country will take more soybeans on one side and we'll sell us or buy more of our soybeans. In exchange, we'll allow them to have access into our economy on something they're trying to sell. That's done all the time. And free traders in Congress have supported those free trade agreements every single time they come down the road. Bottom line is, what Club for Growth is advocating in this is unfettered trade. It's a unilateral drop in our trade barriers and our tariffs, and eliminating all the things that protect our economy from people coming in and effectively brutalizing American manufacturers, putting American manufacturers as a disadvantage. What's more, Club for Growth doesn't recognize that people have different currencies, and the currencies have different values against one another. China in particular has been guilty of manipulating their currency vis-a-vis the dollar to always ensure that Chinese goods are cheaper than American goods. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. When Donald Trump negotiated a deal with China where they purchased about a ton of soybeans, more than a ton, a lot of soybeans. But our financial services industry was able to go into China, which China wanted. One of the aspects of that was that China was going to have actually agreed to not manipulate the currency, with real ramifications if they broke the deal. And so he negotiated the first effective attempt to create a fair, level playing field based on currency between China and the United States. Now China has not followed that. They had no repercussions for that. But understand, Donald Trump understood that in a trade, you have to have a level playing field. And part of that level playing field is making certain that the dollars versus the yuan, as it relates to China, are on an apples to apples basis as opposed to an apples to pears basis, where China then suddenly makes, by manipulating the currency, makes Chinese goods cheaper, hence negating any kind of advantage that might exist on the American side, or creating a level fair playing field and competing for customers. What's more, what we see with China is they have a predatory policy of taking manufacturing sectors and dumping huge amounts of product on the world marketplace with a design of trying to eliminate foreign competition, at which point they would sit there and then raise the prices because they hold all the cards in their hand. That's not something that's in America's interest. It's not something that's in the world's interest, for that matter. America having a strong, positive, America first trade policy, which engages in reciprocal trade between willing countries that are following a set of rules that are agreed upon. That's what international trade is all about. That's what it's supposed to be. That's what we do. That is the basis for every trade agreement. And yet we have people who would in fact put those barriers down and effectively surrender our markets to people who don't have good intent, people who want us to go away, truthfully, with China, who've already declared war on us on a number of fronts, and would think nothing about wiping out key industries simply by driving them out of business through flooding markets. This is going to be, in my estimation, the number one differentiating issue between the Republican candidates in 2024. When we look at the issues, everybody's going to say Russia bad. Everybody's going to say, now they may have differentiations in terms of how to deal with Ukraine, but everybody's going to say Russia bad. Everybody's going to say, oh, we need to bolster our capacity, our domestic capacity to make new munitions and to replace the armament that's been lost in Ukraine. Everybody's going to attack Joe Biden over his disastrous escape from Afghanistan, where he left $87 billion of equipment behind, making the Taliban army the third largest army in the world, just by virtue of our equipment. There's not going to be any difference on that. Everybody's going to talk about, gee, we want to have lower taxes and cut the size and scope of government. Very few will have a plan for it, but everybody's going to talk about it. They're going to talk about election integrity and the need to have election integrity. Everybody's going to talk about that. The one differentiator is going to be, what do we do about trade? How do we proceed about trade? And our experience is that Donald Trump has been the one person who has set the standard on how I'm putting America first on trade. And with that, it's going to be a big fight that all of you have to be aware of, and you have to be able to articulate whichever side you take on it. I'll just say unequivocally, America's for limited government. We believe in limited government. We don't believe in no government. And the Americans for no government crowd are the ones who want to eliminate our borders for labor purposes, to have unlimited cheap labor coming across our borders without having any border security whatsoever. They also are the ones who want to have unlimited access to our markets from people who don't like us very much. And that's stupid. That's an economic suicide pact that we won't sign on to. And so that's the fight that we see really kind of brewing. And just understand, I like a lot of what Club for Growth does. I'm friends with them. At least I was before this video. But the fact is, they're wrong on trade. And if they're going to throw down the gauntlet and have statements up about totally eliminating our borders and this kind of reciprocity free trade dream that they have, it has to be called out, because it's not only unrealistic, it's dangerous. And it's not away. It ends American sovereignty. If we don't have physical borders from a labor perspective, and we don't have physical borders from an economic perspective, we don't have physical borders. And it's ironic that many people who are going to be running for president, including the incumbent, spend a whole lot of time talking about defending other countries' physical borders while they want to eliminate the physical borders here in America. That's unacceptable. And we're going to do everything we can to stand up for America. We hope you'll join us. This is Rick Manning. I wanted to look at a couple of the comments here but that was my rant. It kind of irritated me, as you can tell. Let's do this one. I remember what happened, and things were not as wonderful as everyone was trying to make them. We only don't need as I don't. Okay. I don't know what you're talking there, but I will tell you that in February of 2020, we had a 3.4% unemployment rate. We had a GDP that was around 3%. And when COVID hit, we had tens of millions. We had over 10 million jobs that were unfilled. We had people returning to the workforce in droves who had left the workforce. And people who were retired were coming back into the workforce because jobs were available and they were paying good money. And they said, "Hey, I can make some extra change here." We had an economy that was as robust as any we've seen in our country's history. And the fact of the matter is, we were putting China, and China was on its heels as our trade deficit had dropped dramatically with China. And then in the last couple of years, we effectively ceded that advantage with China and the trade deficit, and we put ourselves in a position of vulnerability as we've engaged in various foreign adventures. So William, I'll have to respectfully disagree with you in terms of your premise. Let's see here. Let's see, Michael. President Trump exposed a lot of crooked politicians today and needs to come back to finish the job. If he doesn't, most will get away with their crimes. The people that did Biden administration put in place were just as crooked as him. No justice, it seems like. Okay. Yeah, I think one of the big issues is going to be corruption. Ironically, we've been subjected to nonstop attempts to prosecute President Trump. We've seen 2 impeachments over false premises. We've seen the federal government itself act in illegal manner to try to take down the Trump presidency, and what in any other circumstance would be viewed as a coup d'etat. We've seen a whole variety of legal challenges that are designed to harass President Trump, and he's been subjected to more legal scrutiny and more attacks by the legal system than any other president in our history, in our nation's history. And yet he still appears to be willing to run for president again and stand up to protect Americans and make certain that our country survives, not just the next 4 years, but for the next 6 years, but for the next decades to follow. So so we see that. One of the things that I'm going to talk about here is it goes off the tariff and trade stuff, but I think that what would happen if President Trump or any Republican comes into office, there's going to be a pretty strong push to fix the federal bureaucracy, which has become not only unwieldy, but in many respects has become thinks it's the dominant branch of government when it's supposed to be subordinate to the president. And I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of effort to do that. Americans for Limited Government is working on a 4-point plan to get that done. First and foremost, we've got language drafted that we're seeking to get introduced that would cause an actual counting of how many federal employees, what percentage of federal employees didn't even log into their computers while the COVID pandemic was going on. We know at HHS, Health and Human Services, from March to December of 2020, 25% of the employees did not log in one single time. Now, those are all the people who, it's not maintenance workers here. We're talking about people who had to use a computer in order to do their work. And so 25% didn't log in one single time. We're going to get to the bottom of what that number is government-wide over the last 3 years. And once you have that, you have a capacity then to say, if 10% of the people didn't log in, then 10% of the jobs aren't necessary, and do a reduction in force and end those people's employment. You don't show up to work, you don't get to work anywhere else in America. And it certainly should be that way for the federal government. Secondly, we would pass the Merit Act, which would make employees accountable to their bosses, and would take a process of currently trying to fire a federal employee could be 6 months to a year of hearings and other different things you have to do. And it would reduce it significantly to less than a month to be able to actually not guarantee the person gets fired, but to have an expedited hearing practice. So you would be able to not feel like if I try to have somebody fired, I'm going to spend the rest of my time in government going to meet with personnel people to try to have somebody fired. So it'll be an expedited system. It's being used in the Veterans Administration. It hasn't led to wholesale firings, but it has led to an increase in the number of people who've been let go. People who are either lazy, incompetent, or recalcitrant and aren't doing their job for the American taxpayer. And that's something which needs to be done. My third proposal that's kind of controversial on conservative sides, but it'll save money in the long run, would be to give early retirement for federal employees and wash out the older employees, particularly the senior executive service employees, who are the ones who really run the government. Their careers, who are the older employees. They've been around for a long time. They make a lot of money. But more importantly, it's where the resistance is based in terms of what we saw against Trump. And this would give you an opportunity to just buy them out and have them go, give them a increase in their pension, have them go by the wayside, and those who refuse to, who are problematic based on historical abuse of power. The one thing you can do with the SES, a senior executive service employee, is you can transfer them. And so promise them that they're going to get transferred from a place they're very comfortable to a place they'd be very uncomfortable after 6 months, offer them the buyout and see how many of them leave. Key is at that point, you're able to replace those people who were willing to do their job in a fair and non-partial manner. And that's what you need in those roles. Those three things would fix a significant portion of the problem. And the last thing is something that President Trump enacted at the end of his term, is called Schedule F. And Schedule F essentially says, if you're an attorney working on issues like regulations and different issues that are policy issues, you are in a different category and you are able to be fired. If you're not, if you want to transfer and not be doing regulatory issues and get out of the way of that, not risk your career, go ahead. But we can't have regulatory attorneys who are blocking the agenda of the incumbent, of the elected party. It's wrong for people who have just because they've got a law degree and they're in government, to be able to block the will of the people, of the elected representatives of the people, because they don't like the policy. They don't like the regulatory change. Too bad. Their job is to actually do what the elected people, the elected officials says they want to do. They don't get to set the agenda. And yet that's what we see them do time and time and time again. Schedule F is a great idea. It will be, I'm sure that anybody's going to go in, certainly the Trump administration would, is going to go in and do it as an executive order. It'll then be fought in court. And maybe 2 to 3 years later, it'll be approved as being allowed to be done. But we need to do something. We need to do something faster than that. And so the other three things are things you can do immediately, while Schedule F is something that is a long-term reform, but it has to be pushed through Congress. And it's going to be a hard slog, because you have to get that through Congress for the very simple reason that an executive order ends the next time around the bend. The next president ends that executive order if they want to. We need to have Congress pass laws, because it's hard to change laws once they're passed. Let's see here. We go one more. I just heard what he said. It says he's going to stop trading with China to get us to take care of ourselves. What? No, he's not going to. I don't. He's not going to. He didn't say that. He said he was going to. He did not say that. He said he's going to make it so China it has to deal in a fair manner, and he's going to encourage. I'll guarantee you, he's going to encourage people manufacturers to move supply chains out of China or to duplicate those supply chains so we're not dependent on China for things. I mean, that's what's going to happen. That's what his policy has been. And yes, he would like those manufacturing jobs to be created here in America. So Americans have those high-paying jobs. That's obviously what he wants. But the fact of the matter is, he's going to try to promote. But the only way you're going to end production in China, you physically can't do that now because we're dependent upon them for a lot of the rare earth metals we need. We're dependent. 7% of pharmaceuticals, primarily in the area of antibiotics, are made in China. So there's a lot of things that are made in China. A lot of our high-tech stuff, our chips and other things, are manufactured in China. So what you're going to see is a move towards America producing more of our goods and having supply chains that are not dependent upon China. But it would be Donald Trump in 2019 in the China trade deal. He sold a lot of soybeans to China from America. China is a big soybean consumer. They buy a lot of our agriculture product. It would be, and that's going to continue. We're just going to he would want to have it done on a reciprocal way where when we're trading something, when the company moves there, they don't steal their intellectual property and they don't cheat on the trade deals. And one of the big complaints right now is that the Trump negotiated deal with China, that they're cheating away at it. And it's making a lot of people mad because they aren't good. China is a bad trading partner because they don't believe that if you invent something, they don't believe that you should be able to reap the rewards of that. So they essentially copy it, duplicate it, and then flood the market with it and try to drive you out of business with the product that you created through your own science, through your own mind, and destroy the incentive to create intellectual property. So there's a lot of aspects to China which are problematic. And from a practical perspective, as an American, it's horrific to me that we get stuff imported from China that's made by slave labor, that's made by people who are not working as at-will employees. They're working as with a point of a gun in their face, and if they don't work, they die. We got rid of that in 1865. And to then import slave-made goods from China and a whole variety of different categories. To import slave-made goods from China is wrong. It's wrong on every level, and it needs to be stopped. And that's and that's not just true with China; it's true with anywhere else. But ultimately, it's one of those things that you as consumer have a say-so over. If you're buying clothing and you see it's made in China, ask yourself, do you really want to buy something that's made by slave labor? Those are questions I ask myself all the time, and my answer is no. I put it back and I go and I tell the clerk, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I know that's made with slave labor and I'm not doing it. Ultimately, we have a say-so as consumers about that as well. In terms of overall trade, the bottom line is America, we have borders. Every country in the world has borders. They have rules about what we can export to those countries. And we have rules about what can be exported to this country. Most countries in the world have pretty low bar to access our markets, because one of the essences of the post-World War II era was a general agreement of trade and tariffs, a GATT, which allowed third world countries to be able to sell to us to help build their economies, while America did not use our economic might to sell to them. That was part of GATT. That was the first real trade agreement, post-World War II trade agreement. We were the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. After World War II, our economy was thriving. Our factories were buzzing, and Europe was on its knees. They didn't have any factories infrastructure anymore because it all got blown up. And as a result, to get the rest of the world on its feet post World War II, we said, if get your factories up and running, and you can sell to us, and we'll provide a customer base to help the world rebound. We're 75, 77 years away from that now. And it's time we start a new way of looking at things in terms of trade. And America can no longer be the exporter of our wealth around the world without any reciprocal benefit for America. And that's one of the challenges that faces this century, is we have to be, in order for America to remain strong, we have to have an industrial base. And the trading away of our industrial base for trinkets is stupid. It's against our interests, and it needs to stop. That's the fight that's going to happen in the Republican Party. It's going to be about trade policy. I've seen it time and time again that's the defining line amongst many people who are who truly believe that the free trade policy is a better policy. The straight free trade, unfettered trade policy is a better policy. Nobody's against trade. I'm against trade that doesn't benefit America. And I think anybody who looks at it fair and square would agree. With that, this is Rick Manning signing off for Americans for Limited Government. We will be back tomorrow with another topic.